The HOA president demanded I pay $8,500 or leave my inherited lake cabin. I discovered my grandfather's secret. I owned part of the lake where their dock sat. When confronted with proof, they backed down immediately. Now they pay me rent, and the president resigned in shame. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more Karen stories. My grandfather left me his small cabin by Pine Lake when he died last year. I never expected to own any property at 32 years old, especially not in this economy. The cabin was a simple wooden house with 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen and a porch that faced the water. Nothing fancy, but it sat on a beautiful spot with tall pine trees all around and a view of the lake that changed colors with the sky. The place needed work. The roof leaked in one corner, the porch steps creaked dangerously, and the walls needed fresh paint, but I loved it immediately. I had been living in a cramped apartment in the city, working a job I hated, when the lawyer called about the inheritance. At first I thought it might be a mistake. My grandfather and I had been close when I was young, spending summers fishing and exploring the woods, but as I grew older and moved away for college and work, our visits became less frequent. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years before he passed away suddenly from a heart attack. He was very specific that you should have the cabin, the lawyer explained. He left a letter for you as well. The letter was short but meaningful. This place brought me peace when I needed it most. I hope it does the same for you. Look after it and it will look after you. I quit my job the next day and packed everything I owned into my old pickup truck. It felt like the right time for a change. The drive to Pine Lake took almost 6 hours, and when I finally turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to the cabin, the sun was setting behind the trees, painting everything in warm gold. That first night, I sat on the rickety porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the sounds of the forest and watching the stars appear one by one. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The next morning, I started making plans for repairs. The cabin needed work, but it was solid. My grandfather had built it himself in the 1970s, and he hadn't cut any corners. I spent the next 2 days cleaning, making lists, and exploring the property. According to the deed, I owned about 2 acres of land, mostly wooded, with about 80 feet of shoreline. On the 3rd day after I moved in, someone knocked on my door around noon. I was in the middle of fixing a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink and wasn't expecting visitors. When I opened the door, wiping my hands on my jeans, a man in an expensive gray suit stood there with a thick folder tucked under his arm and a disapproving look on his face. "I'm Robert Jenkins, president of the Pine Lake Homeowners Association," he said without offering to shake hands. His voice was crisp and cold, like the first frost of autumn. I noticed he was wearing polished leather shoes that seemed completely impractical for the dirt roads around the lake. "I didn't know there was an HOA here," I said, genuinely surprised. "I'm James Collins. I inherited this place from my grandfather." "Yes, we're aware of the change in ownership." Jenkins frowned at my truck parked nearby. "That's partly why I'm here. There are several issues that need to be addressed immediately." "What kind of issues?" He pointed at my truck. "That eyesore needs to be removed from view. All vehicles must be parked in designated areas or in garages. And your cabin needs significant improvements to meet our community standards, starting with a fresh coat of paint in an approved color. The current condition is unacceptable." I looked at my cabin. Sure, it needed work, but it wasn't falling down or anything. "I just got here. I'm planning to fix it up." "Plans aren't enough. There's also the matter of your unpaid HOA dues." Jenkins pulled a paper from his folder. "Your grandfather stopped paying 5 years ago, claiming some nonsense about property lines. The total amount due, including late fees, is $8,500. I nearly choked. $8,000? That's crazy. My grandfather never mentioned any HOA. It doesn't matter what he told you or didn't tell you. The rules apply to everyone on Pine Lake property." He handed me the paper. "This is an official warning. You have 30 days to address these violations and pay the outstanding dues, or we'll begin eviction proceedings." "Eviction? You can't just evict someone from property they own." Jenkins smiled thinly. "You'd be surprised what we can do. The HOA agreement gives us considerable power." He looked past me into the cabin and added, "I see you've already started making unauthorized modifications. You'll need to submit proper forms for any changes, even interior ones." I tried to argue, but he held up his hand. "The rules are clearly outlined in the HOA covenant. I suggest you read it carefully." He placed the thick folder on my porch railing. "Board meeting is Thursday at 7 p.m. at the community center if you have questions. Good day." With that, he turned and walked back to his shiny black SUV parked at the edge of my property. I stood there holding the warning notice, feeling like someone had just punched me in the stomach. This cabin was supposed to be my fresh start, my escape from stress and problems. Now, 3 days in, I was facing an $8,500 bill and threats of eviction. That night, I called my friend Lisa, who works as a property lawyer in the city I'd just left. "Don't pay anything yet," she advised after I explained the situation. "Something doesn't sound right. HOAs are powerful, but they can't just claim your property as part of their association without documentation. Let me check the county property records first." "Thanks, Lisa. I really appreciate it." "No problem. Just sit tight and don't sign anything they give you." For the next week, the HOA people made my life increasingly difficult. They put violation notices on my door almost every day for things like improper waste disposal. I had left a small pile of branches near the trees after clearing some deadwood, and unauthorized outdoor furniture, the old wooden chair my grandfather had always kept on the porch. Someone even called the local building inspector when I was fixing my roof, claiming I didn't have proper permits. Luckily, the inspector turned out to be reasonable. He checked my work, told me I was doing fine for basic repairs, and advised me to get a permit only if I planned to change the structure itself. "Don't let them bully you," he said quietly before leaving. "Some of these HOA folks have nothing better to do than make trouble." The worst incident happened about 10 days after Jenkins' visit. I woke up early to the sound of a boat motor. When I looked out the window, I saw workers in a small boat putting up a rope barrier with orange floats in the water about 20 feet from my shoreline. A sign attached to one of the posts read, "HOA members only beyond this point." I rushed outside in my pajamas. "Hey, what are you doing?" One of the workers, a young guy in waders, looked uncomfortable. "Just following orders, sir. Mr. Jenkins says you can't use the lake anymore until you pay your fees." "This is ridiculous. You can't fence off a public lake." "It's not exactly public," the other worker said. "Most of the shoreline is HOA property. Mr. Jenkins says your access rights are suspended." They finished their work quickly and sped away in their boat before I could argue further. I stood on my small beach, fuming. Through the trees to my right, about half a mile away, I could see the large community dock where several expensive boats were moored. In the other direction was a small peninsula with what looked like a clubhouse and a swimming area. I was about to call Lisa again when my phone rang. It was her. "James, I found something interesting," she said. "Very interesting, actually. Can we meet tomorrow? I want to show you some documents in person." "Is it good news or bad news?" I asked. "Let's just say your grandfather might have been a lot smarter than anyone gave him credit for." The next day, Lisa arrived with a stack of old maps and property documents. We spread them out on my kitchen table. "Your grandfather was quite the strategic thinker," she said with a smile. "I checked the original property lines from 1952 when this area was first divided into lots. According to these documents, your property doesn't end at the shoreline like most lake properties do. It extends 200 feet into the lake itself." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, trying to understand the implications. "It means you own part of the lake bed. And guess what sits on that part?" She showed me a satellite image with property lines overlaid. "The HOA's main boat dock and about half of their clubhouse deck. They built on your property without permission or proper easements." I stared at the map in disbelief. How could they make such a huge mistake? When the HOA formed in 1995, they just assumed all lakefront properties ended at the shoreline, which is typical. But your grandfather's land was special because it was part of the original homestead that existed before the lake community developed. He never corrected their assumption, just quietly paid less property tax and stayed out of their way. Did he know about this? I wondered aloud. Lisa smiled. "Based on some notes in the county records, I'd say he knew exactly what he was doing. There's a record of him disputing a survey in 1996, right after the HOA formed. He hired his own surveyor who confirmed these boundaries, but he never took further action. He just kept the information to himself." "Like an ace up his sleeve," I murmured, remembering how my grandfather loved poker nights with his friends. "Exactly. And now that ace belongs to you." With Lisa's help, I prepared a detailed letter with all the evidence. We included certified copies of the original deed, historical surveys, and current satellite images clearly showing the encroachment. Lisa also helped me draft a formal cease and desist notice regarding the water barrier they had installed. The next day, I put on my only decent clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt, and walked into the HOA office located in a small building near their clubhouse. Robert Jenkins was sitting at a large table with 4 other board members, apparently in the middle of a meeting. "Mr. Collins?" he said with obvious annoyance. We're in a closed session. If you have questions, you need to make an appointment. I got your final warning yesterday, I said, placing my folder on the table. But I have some information you should see before we go any further. Jenkins barely looked up. Unless you're here to pay your fees and address the violations, we have nothing to discuss right now. Actually, we do. I opened the folder and spread out the maps and property records. According to these legal documents, which have been verified by the county assessor's office, I own the land extending 200 feet into the lake. That includes where your main dock is anchored and about half of your clubhouse deck. The room went silent. A woman with short gray hair picked up one of the maps with shaking hands. This can't be right, Jenkins said, his face turning an interesting shade of red. All lakefront properties end at the high water mark. Not mine, I replied calmly. My lawyer verified everything. You have two choices. You can remove your dock and deck from my property within 30 days, or you can start paying me rent of $3,000 per month for using my land. Retroactive to when you built these structures, of course. This is absurd, Jenkins sputtered. You can't just come in here and... I can and I am, I interrupted. Also, you need to remove that barrier in front of my shoreline immediately. You're restricting access to my property. One of the board members, a balding man with glasses, whispered something to Jenkins, who now looked genuinely worried. Let's not be hasty, Jenkins said, his tone suddenly much more conciliatory. Perhaps we can work something out that benefits everyone. I'm open to a reasonable agreement, I said. First, I want written confirmation that my cabin and property are not part of your HOA and never were. Second, I want unrestricted access to the lake. Third, I want a written apology for the harassment I've endured since arriving. Harassment is a strong word, Jenkins protested weakly. Would you prefer coordinated intimidation? Or should we discuss the building inspector you sent to my property under false pretenses? That could be considered filing a false report. After 3 hours of tense discussion, several phone calls to their lawyer, and a lot of begrudging acknowledgments, they finally agreed to my terms. They also offered to repave my driveway and provide assistance with some of my cabin repairs if I would grant them a proper easement for the dock at a reasonable annual fee. I left their office with a signed agreement and a much lighter heart. The barrier in the water was removed that same afternoon. Word spread quickly around Pine Lake. Many neighbors who were tired of the HOA's overly strict rules stopped by to congratulate me. Some even brought food and drinks, turning my porch into an impromptu celebration spot. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, who lived 3 cabins down, laughed heartily when I told her the full story. Your grandfather was a sly old fox, she said, sipping lemonade on my porch. He and Robert's father were rivals for years. When Marshall Jenkins started pushing everyone to join his fancy new HOA in the 90s, your grandfather found this loophole and kept quiet about it. He was playing the long game. Why didn't he ever use this information? I asked. Oh, he used it in his own way, Mrs. Wilson said. Every time Marshall tried to force him to paint his cabin or move his boat, your grandfather would hint that he knew something the HOA didn't want revealed. They mostly left him alone after that, but I don't think anyone knew exactly what his secret was. He was waiting for the perfect moment, or the perfect person, to use it fully. 6 months later, my cabin looks better than ever. I repaired the roof properly, rebuilt the porch with strong new wood, and yes, gave the whole place a fresh coat of paint, a warm cedar color that I chose myself with no HOA approval needed. The HOA pays me a fair rent for their dock space, which I've used to add a small guest room and upgrade the ancient heating system. Robert Jenkins stepped down as HOA president after the embarrassment. The new president, a retired teacher named Helen, is much more reasonable and focuses on actually helping the community instead of enforcing petty rules about mailbox colors and garden gnomes. Last weekend, I hosted a barbecue by the lake. Many neighbors came, including Mrs. Wilson, who brought her famous apple pie. We sat on my new expanded deck as the sun set over Pine Lake, painting the water gold and crimson. Your grandfather would be proud, she said as we watched a family of ducks paddle by. He always said patience is the best revenge. I smiled, thinking about how a small, shabby cabin turned out to be so much more than it seemed. Sometimes, the best victories are the ones you don't even know you're fighting for until the perfect moment arrives. As I sat there surrounded by new friends, I remembered my grandfather's letter, "Look after it and it will look after you." He had known exactly what he was doing when he left me this special place with its secret advantage. The next morning, I started work on my own small dock. Yes, I built my own dock now, extending from my beach out to the deeper water. As I worked, I realized that the view from my cabin wasn't just beautiful. It was mine, fair and square. And no amount of fancy suits, official-looking papers, or important titles could change that simple fact. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about standing your ground and finding your place in the world, especially when that place happens to include a boat dock that others built for you without knowing it.